Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now. The words cut through the cold night air just as Naomi Carter pulled into the gas station beneath the buzzing white lights off Highway 61. Rainwater slid across her windshield in crooked lines while the police cruiser behind her painted the wet pavement red and blue. A few people standing near the pumps turned to stare. Naomi tightened her fingers around the steering wheel for a second, trying to steady the exhaustion still sitting deep in her bones after 14 straight hours inside St. Mary's Memorial Hospital. Her scrubs were hidden beneath an oversized gray hoodie, but the faint smell of antiseptic still clung to her skin. In the passenger seat sat a paper bag holding a turkey sandwich she never got to eat and a folded crayon drawing from a little girl whose heartbeat she had helped bring back just hours earlier. "Please don't make this difficult," Officer Daniel Brooks said as he stepped closer to her window. His flashlight cut sharply across her face before dropping toward the inside of the car, like he was searching for something already decided in his mind. Naomi lowered the window halfway. Rain drifted inside with the wind. "Officer, did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. Brooks ignored the question. "License and registration." His voice carried the kind of calm that didn't feel calm at all. Across the parking lot, another officer stayed near the cruiser, one hand resting near his belt while watching everything in silence. Naomi reached slowly toward her purse exactly the way her father had taught her years ago. Slow hands. No sudden movements. Keep your voice respectful. Give them no reason. But even while following every rule, she could already feel it happening. The tension. The assumption. The way Brooks looked at her old Honda like it didn't belong there. Like she didn't belong there. A pickup truck rolled into the station beside them, headlights splashing across the scene. Someone near the ice machine lifted a phone and started recording. Brooks noticed it too, and his jaw tightened. "Step out of the car," he repeated. Naomi blinked in confusion. "Why?" "Because I said so." The rain grew heavier, tapping hard against the metal roof above the pumps. Naomi slowly opened the door and stepped onto the slick concrete. Her sneakers splashed into a shallow puddle. Brooks immediately moved closer than necessary, guiding her toward the hood of the car, while people across the station openly watched now. Naomi's pulse began hammering in her throat. "Officer, I'm just trying to get home to my son," she said. Brooks leaned down slightly, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Then you should have thought about that before resisting." Naomi stared at him. "I haven't resisted anything." For one brief second, Brooks said nothing. The red and blue lights flickered across his face while rain collected along the brim of his cap. Then his hand reached toward her wrist. "She assaulted an officer," he suddenly shouted toward the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. Gasps rippled near the pumps. Naomi's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, I didn't." The phone cameras lifted higher. The second officer finally stepped forward. Above them, mounted beneath the corner of the gas station roof, a tiny security camera blinked red through the rain, recording every second. The rain kept falling as Naomi stood beside her car with cold water soaking through the sleeves of her hoodie, while strangers stared at her like they were waiting to see what kind of woman she would become under pressure. Angry, loud, dangerous. That was what Officer Brooks expected. She could see it in the way he squared his shoulders every time she moved even slightly. But Naomi Carter had spent most of her life learning how to stay calm inside rooms filled with panic. Inside emergency rooms where families cried into folded hands. Inside hospital hallways where machines screamed warnings in the middle of the night. Calm was the only thing that had ever kept her standing. The second officer, Tyler Dean, moved closer and stopped beside Brooks without saying a word. He looked younger up close, maybe late 20s, with rain dripping from the edge of his uniform collar. His eyes flicked once toward the small crowd gathering beneath the gas station canopy, then back to Naomi. A woman near pump 4 held her phone high while whispering to somebody beside her. Naomi could already imagine the comments spreading online before she even made it home. Black woman detained. Another traffic stop. Another blurry video. Another opinion from people who were not there. Brooks stepped toward her again. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Naomi felt her stomach tighten. "Officer, I have done nothing wrong," she said carefully. "I asked why I was stopped." "You are being detained pending investigation." "Investigation of what?" Brooks ignored her question again. The radio clipped to his shoulder crackled with static before another voice came through too low to understand. Naomi looked past him toward the security camera mounted above the station windows. The tiny red light still blinked steadily through the rain, recording every second. She held on to that thought because right now it was the only thing making her feel less alone. Somewhere 20 miles away, her 8-year-old son Isaiah was probably asleep on his grandmother's couch waiting for her to come home after another overnight shift. She pictured the little Spider-Man blanket he always dragged into the living room when he tried to stay awake for her. Her chest ached thinking about it. Brooks suddenly reached toward the pocket of her hoodie. Naomi stepped back instinctively. "Do not touch me without telling me why," she said, louder this time. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside the cruiser. Brooks stared at Naomi for a long second before forcing a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "See," he said toward Tyler. "Combative." Naomi almost laughed from disbelief. Combative. After spending 14 hours saving lives. After driving under the speed limit through pouring rain just trying to buy coffee for the ride home. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, but she kept her voice even. "Officer Dean," she said, looking at the younger cop directly for the first time, "did you see me threaten anybody?" Tyler hesitated, just for a second, but Brooks noticed it immediately. "You let me handle this," Brooks snapped without looking away from Naomi. The tension thickened beneath the fluorescent lights. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Then Naomi heard a small electronic sound from inside her car, her phone connecting to Bluetooth. A sleepy child's voice suddenly filled the quiet night through the Honda speakers. "Mom, are you still coming home?" Everything stopped. Even Brooks looked toward the car. Isaiah's voice cracked softly through the rain. "Mom." Naomi swallowed hard and closed her eyes for one brief moment while cold water slid down her face. Around the gas station, people lowered their phones just slightly. The scene no longer looked dangerous. It looked human. Officer Brooks looked away from Naomi for the first time that night after hearing the little boy's voice echo from the Honda speakers. The rain softened briefly into a cold mist that drifted through the station lights while the crowd stood frozen in awkward silence. Isaiah's sleepy voice had changed the atmosphere in a way Brooks clearly did not like. The scene no longer felt like a threat being contained. It felt like a mother being humiliated in public on her way home from work. Brooks pressed his jaw tight and reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, confirm prior incidents connected to vehicle registration," he said firmly, almost too firmly, like he needed the words to sound official enough to erase what everybody had just heard. Static answered first. Then a tired dispatcher replied that the plate had no active warrants, no alerts, no stolen vehicle report. Naomi lowered her eyes for a second as exhaustion settled deeper into her chest. She already knew there had been no reason to stop her, but hearing it out loud in front of strangers still felt surreal. Brooks barely reacted. "License flagged earlier tonight near Ridgeway Avenue," he said quickly. "Matching description." Tyler glanced at him. Dispatch did not say that. Brooks turned sharply toward the younger officer. "I saw the alert myself." Tyler hesitated. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his sleeves as he shifted his weight uncomfortably. Naomi noticed the flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. For the first time since the stop began, somebody besides her seemed to realize something was wrong. Across the station, the woman recording lowered her phone slightly and whispered to the man beside her. Another customer stepped out of the convenience store holding a coffee cup, slowing down as he took in the flashing lights and tense voices. Brooks noticed every pair of eyes turning toward him now instead of Naomi. That seemed to irritate him more than anything else. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," he said. Naomi slowly raised both hands away from her sides, even though they had never left plain sight. Her fingers trembled from the cold. She had spent the last 14 hours checking oxygen levels, adjusting for lines, and comforting frightened families under fluorescent hospital lights. Now she stood under different fluorescent lights being treated like somebody dangerous because she asked a question during a traffic stop. The absurdity of it made her stomach twist. "Officer," Naomi said quietly, "what exactly am I accused of?" Brooks stepped closer again. "Failure to cooperate. I gave you my license. You stepped away during questioning." Naomi blinked in disbelief. "You reached into my pocket." Brooks ignored that too. Tyler looked toward the security camera mounted above the station entrance. The red light still blinked steadily through the mist, recording everything. Brooks followed his gaze and immediately looked annoyed. "You worried about cameras now?" Tyler asked before he could stop himself. The question hung heavily in the air. Brooks stared at him for a long moment. "You trying to tell me how to do my job?" Tyler looked down immediately. "No, sir." Naomi watched the exchange carefully. She recognized the pressure in Tyler's face, the fear of speaking up against somebody with more authority. She had seen that same expression on young nurses during chaotic emergency shifts when senior doctors refused to admit mistakes. People stayed quiet because staying quiet felt safer. But silence had a cost. A gust of wind pushed Rain sideways through the station canopy. Naomi folded her arms against the cold and looked toward her car, where Isaiah's small backpack rested in the back seat beneath a superhero blanket. She suddenly remembered the little girl from the hospital earlier that night, the one whose pulse had finally stabilized after nearly 20 minutes in critical condition. Before Naomi left the room, the child had reached weakly for her hand and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Standing there now beneath flashing lights and suspicious eyes, Naomi wondered who was going to stay for her. The rain picked up again, harder this time, rattling against the metal canopy above the gas pumps while the blue and red lights from the patrol cars painted every puddle in restless color. Naomi stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest, trying to hold on to warmth that had already left her body an hour ago somewhere between the hospital parking garage and this gas station off Highway 61. Her shoes were soaked through. Her eyes burned from exhaustion. But the thing wearing her down most was not the cold. It was the feeling that no matter how calmly she spoke, Officer Brooks had already decided who she was before she ever rolled down her window. Brooks took a slow step toward her again. "You are making this situation worse for yourself," he said. Naomi looked directly at him. "By asking what I did wrong." Brooks did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the small crowd gathered near the convenience store entrance. Several people were still recording now. A teenage employee stood frozen behind the glass doors holding a mop, openly staring. Brooks lowered his voice. "You should cooperate instead of performing for a crowd." Naomi almost laughed from disbelief. "I am not the one yelling accusations." Tyler shifted beside the patrol car, his eyes moving back and forth between them. Brooks ignored Naomi's comment and pulled a folded citation pad from his jacket pocket. Rain tapped steadily against the paper while he scribbled something down with quick, irritated movements. Naomi watched carefully. Her years in emergency rooms had trained her to notice details under pressure. Small things. Timestamps. Dosages. Names written incorrectly. Mistakes hidden inside rushed paperwork. Brooks tore the paper free and held it out toward her. "Sign here." Naomi did not take it. "What is it?" "Acknowledgement of resisting during a lawful stop." Naomi stared at him. The words felt unreal. "That is not true." "Sign it anyway." "I am not signing something false." Brooks let out a sharp breath through his nose and looked toward Tyler like he expected backup. "See what I am dealing with." Tyler looked down at the wet pavement instead of answering. Naomi slowly reached toward the citation, not to sign it, but to read it closer beneath the gas station lights. That was when she noticed something. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The time listed near the top did not match the actual stop. Brooks had written the encounter as starting nearly 15 minutes earlier than it really had. Naomi looked up immediately. "Officer Brooks," she said calmly, "that timestamp is wrong." Brooks froze for half a second before recovering. "No, it is not." Naomi pointed toward the paper. "You stopped me after 2:13 in the morning. Your report says 1:58. Tyler looked up quickly. Brooks snatched the paper back. "You are not in a position to argue details." But Naomi could already feel the shift happening around them. The people recording nearby leaned closer. The woman at pump 4 whispered, "Did she catch him changing it?" Brooks turned toward the crowd immediately. Everybody stepped back. His voice carried sharper now, less controlled. Naomi kept her tone level. "If the timestamp is wrong, then the report is wrong." Brooks stared at her with open irritation. "You think you know police procedure?" Naomi met his eyes without flinching. "No, officer. I know documentation. Lives depend on accuracy where I work too." For the first time that night, Brooks looked uncertain. Just briefly. But Naomi saw it. Tyler saw it too. Rainwater slid down the side of the cruiser while silence spread through the station again. Somewhere behind the clouds, thunder rolled low across the Mississippi sky. Then Brooks folded the citation slowly and slipped it back into his jacket. "Turn around," he said coldly. "Now." Naomi stared at Officer Brooks while rainwater rolled down the sleeves of her hoodie and gathered at her fingertips before dripping onto the pavement below. The gas station lights hummed softly overhead, casting pale reflections across the wet concrete, while the crowd around them continued growing larger by the minute. Some people stood silently with crossed arms. Others whispered while holding phones chest high, recording everything. Naomi could feel every pair of eyes shifting between her and Brooks, waiting to see what would happen next. Brooks stepped closer until only a few inches separated them. "I gave you a lawful order," he said coldly. "Turn around." Naomi kept her voice steady even though her heartbeat was pounding hard enough to make her chest ache. "Officer, I am asking for a supervisor before this goes any further." Brooks gave a short laugh without humor. "You do not get to control this situation." Naomi glanced once toward Tyler. The younger officer looked deeply uncomfortable now, his hands resting near his vest while rain darkened the shoulders of his uniform. He still had not spoken again since the issue with the timestamp. Brooks noticed Naomi looking at him, and his expression hardened instantly. "Do not involve him," Brooks snapped. "This is between you and me." Naomi swallowed slowly. "That is exactly the problem." The words landed harder than she expected. Even the crowd seemed to quiet after she said it. Brooks stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening beneath the flashing lights. Then he reached for her wrist again. Naomi instinctively pulled her arm back, not aggressively, just enough to create space between them. Brooks immediately turned toward the crowd and raised his voice. "She is resisting commands." "No, I am not," Naomi replied quickly. "I asked for a supervisor and legal clarification." Brooks moved to guide her toward the hood of the Honda. Naomi lost her footing slightly on the slick pavement and stumbled against the side of the car door with a sharp metallic sound that echoed through the station. A few people in the crowd reacted immediately. "Hey, easy," somebody shouted from near the pumps. Tyler stepped forward at last. "Sir, maybe we should slow this down," he said carefully. Brooks turned on him instantly. "You questioning my judgment now?" Tyler hesitated. Naomi could almost see the internal battle happening behind his eyes. Duty, fear, conscience. Brooks pointed toward Naomi without looking away from Tyler. "This woman has been non-compliant since the stop began." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. "I answered every question you asked. You challenged authority. I corrected a false timestamp." The silence that followed felt heavy and electric beneath the rain. Brooks looked around and realized too many people had heard that sentence clearly. The woman near Pump 4 lifted her phone higher again. Another customer muttered, "This does not look right." Brooks suddenly grabbed for the phone mounted on the dashboard inside Naomi's car, where Isaiah's voice had come through earlier. "Sir, do not touch my property," Naomi said firmly, stepping toward the open door. Brooks blocked her path immediately. "Back up. My son is on that phone." As if hearing his name from miles away, Isaiah's sleepy voice crackled faintly through the Bluetooth speaker again. "Mom." The little voice cut through the tension like glass. Naomi felt her throat tighten painfully. She could picture him half asleep under his Spider-Man blanket waiting for headlights outside his grandmother's apartment. Brooks looked visibly irritated now, like the humanity of the moment itself had become an inconvenience to him. He reached toward the dashboard again, but before he could touch anything, the teenage gas station employee suddenly pushed open the convenience store door. "Sir," the teenager called nervously. "My manager said the security cameras upload automatically online every 15 minutes. Brooks froze. Completely froze. Rain slid slowly down the brim of his cap while the words settled over the station. Tyler looked up sharply toward the blinking camera mounted above them. The crowd grew silent again. And for the first time all night, Naomi saw uncertainty replace authority in Officer Brooks's eyes. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The rain softened into a thin silver curtain drifting through the fluorescent lights while the tiny red that on the security camera continued blinking above the gas station entrance. Recording, watching, remembering. Naomi stood perfectly still beside her car with water dripping slowly from the edge of her braids onto her shoulders. Her chest rose and fell carefully as she tried to steady her breathing. The cold had settled deep into her body now, but exhaustion sat even deeper. Her hands trembled slightly from adrenaline and fatigue after the longest shift She had worked all month. Somewhere beyond the clouds, another low rumble of thunder rolled across the Mississippi night. Brooks finally looked away from the camera and toward the teenage employee standing near the door. "Go back inside," he said sharply. The teenager hesitated. "My manager already saved the footage." Brooks did not answer. He simply stared at the kid until the teenager slowly disappeared back into the store. Tyler remained silent beside the cruiser, rainwater soaking through the dark fabric of his uniform, while he looked between Brooks and Naomi like he was seeing the entire situation differently now. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the pavement. Tiny ripples spread across puddles near her shoes each time rain touched the ground. The flashing police lights reflected across the water in broken red and blue streaks that looked strangely soft now instead of threatening. She suddenly realized how tired she truly was. Not just tonight. Tired in a way that had been building for years. Tired of speaking carefully. Tired of making herself smaller to avoid frightening people. Tired of teaching her son how to survive moments exactly like this before he was even old enough to understand why. Isaiah's small voice still echoed faintly in her mind. "Mom, are you still coming home?" Naomi swallowed hard and closed her eyes briefly. Inside the hospital earlier that night, she had held pressure against a little girl's chest while alarms screamed around the room and terrified parents cried outside the door. Nobody in that room had cared what color Naomi's skin was while she fought to save their child. But out here beneath a gas station canopy, soaked by rain under flashing lights, somehow her humanity had become negotiable again. Brooks shifted uncomfortably for the first time all night. "You are overcomplicating a routine stop," he muttered, though his voice sounded less certain now. Naomi looked at him quietly. "Routine for who?" Brooks opened his mouth, then stopped. The crowd around them had grown quieter too. Phones remained raised, but the energy had changed. Earlier people were waiting for conflict. Now they were witnessing something heavier, something sadder. Tyler slowly removed his cap and ran a wet hand through his hair before looking directly at Naomi. "Ma'am," he said softly, "have you been calm this entire time?" Brooks snapped toward him immediately. "Dean." But Tyler did not look away from Naomi. She nodded once. "Yes." Tyler glanced toward the blinking camera overhead again. The silence that followed felt almost sacred beneath the steady rain. No yelling, no sirens, just water tapping against metal roofs and distant traffic moving along the highway. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself tighter against the cold. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I save people every night," she said. "And tonight I just wanted to buy coffee and go home to my son." Nobody responded. Brooks stared at the pavement. Tyler looked away completely. Even the people recording lowered their phones slightly. For one fragile moment beneath the fluorescent glow and endless rain, the entire gas station seemed to breathe together in silence. The silence beneath the gas station canopy finally broke with the distant sound of another vehicle pulling into the lot. Headlights swept across the wet pavement before a dark police SUV stopped beside the cruisers. Every face turned at once. Brooks straightened immediately, tension returning to his shoulders as a tall, gray-haired supervisor stepped out into the rain, pulling a jacket tighter around his uniform. Sergeant Michael Reeves looked around the station slowly, taking in the gathered crowd, the raised phones, Naomi standing soaked beside her Honda, and Brooks with water dripping from the brim of his cap. "What is going on here?" Reeves asked calmly. Nobody answered right away. Brooks spoke first. "Routine traffic stop escalated due to noncompliance." Naomi let out a quiet breath through her nose, but said nothing. Reeves looked toward Tyler. "Officer Dean?" Tyler hesitated long enough for everybody to notice. "There has been some disagreement about the report details, sir." Brooks turned sharply toward him. "Dean." But Reeves lifted a hand slightly, stopping him. "What kind of disagreement?" Tyler glanced once toward Naomi before answering. "The timestamp on the citation may not match the actual stop." The rain seemed louder after those words. Reeves slowly looked at Brooks. "Is that true?" "It was a documentation error," Brooks replied quickly. "Nothing significant." Naomi watched Reeves carefully. Unlike Brooks, the older officer was not rushing. His eyes moved from the citation in Brooks's hand to the blinking security camera overhead, then toward the crowd still recording everything. "And why exactly was she detained?" Reeves asked. Brooks folded his arms. "She resisted commands and became confrontational." Before Naomi could respond, a voice suddenly called out from near the gas pumps. That is not what happened. Everybody turned. It was the woman who had been recording from the beginning. She stepped forward slowly, lowering her phone just enough to speak clearly. She stayed calm the whole time. Another man beside her nodded. We watched everything. Brooks looked furious now. Sir, civilians do not have the full context. Reeves ignored him and looked toward the convenience store entrance where the teenage employee stood nervously holding the door open. You mentioned security footage? The teenager nodded immediately. Yes, sir. My manager already uploaded it from the system. Brooks's face changed completely at those words. Not anger this time. Something closer to panic. Reeves noticed it too. Without another word, he held out his hand toward Brooks. Body camera. Brooks did not move for a second. Then slowly, reluctantly, he removed the device from his vest. Rainwater slid down the plastic casing while Reeves examined it beneath the station lights. Tyler looked down at the pavement. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself tighter against the cold. Her exhaustion felt heavier than ever now, but somewhere deep inside, something else had begun replacing fear. Not victory, just truth finally beginning to breathe. Reeves pressed a button on the camera and several seconds of footage played through the small speaker. The audio crackled softly beneath the rain. Naomi's calm voice. Brooks accusing her of resisting. The issue with the timestamp. The crowd listening. Then Reeves stopped the playback abruptly and lifted his eyes toward Brooks very slowly. You reported physical aggression before verbal escalation, he said. Brooks immediately spoke over him. Sir, she was becoming unpredictable. Reeves stared at him for a long moment beneath the flashing red and blue lights. I do not see unpredictability, he said quietly. I see a tired woman trying to go home. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Tyler finally looked directly at Naomi again, shame written openly across his face now. Around them, the storm continued drifting across the dark Mississippi highway while the blinking security camera above the station kept recording every second of the truth coming to light. Rain continued falling in soft, steady waves across the gas station roof, while Sergeant Reeves stood motionless beside the patrol SUV with Officer Brooks's body camera still in his hand. Nobody in the crowd spoke anymore. The tension that had filled the station earlier had shifted into something quieter now, something heavier. Naomi leaned against the side of her Honda for support, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in her body. Her soaked hoodie clung to her arms, and cold water trickled down the back of her neck, but she barely noticed anymore. She only wanted to go home. Reeves finally handed the body camera back to Brooks. Officer Brooks, he said calmly, I need you to step aside for a moment. Brooks looked stunned. Sir, with respect, this situation is being misunderstood. Reeves held his gaze. Step aside. Brooks hesitated before slowly walking a few feet away beneath the flashing patrol lights. Tyler watched him go with visible discomfort. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the pavement again. She did not feel victorious. She did not feel angry either. Mostly she felt tired in a way words could not fully explain. Tired of moments like this becoming stories people debated instead of pain people understood. Reeves turned toward her carefully. Miss Carter, he said, his voice gentler now. You are free to leave. The words settled softly into the rainy night. Naomi blinked once as if her body needed time to believe them. Around the gas station, several people lowered their phones completely for the first time since the stop began. Tyler stepped forward slowly. Ma'am, he said quietly, I am sorry. Naomi looked at him. Rain dripped from his hair onto his collar while shame sat openly across his face. Unlike Brooks, Tyler looked like somebody forced to confront something inside himself that he had spent years avoiding. Naomi could see it clearly. She had seen that same expression before in hospital waiting rooms after difficult conversations families never expected to hear. You do not have to apologize for him, Naomi said softly. Tyler swallowed hard. I still stood there. Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead while traffic hissed across the wet highway beyond the station. Brooks remained near the cruiser speaking quietly into his radio, but his confidence seemed gone now. The crowd no longer looked at Naomi with suspicion. They looked at her with recognition. Humanity returning after being stripped away in public. Tyler glanced toward Isaiah's backpack resting in the back seat of the Honda. You said you have a son? Naomi nodded. 8 years old. Tyler looked down for a second before speaking again. I have a little sister around that age. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. Naomi studied him quietly. He was young enough that there was still room for change inside him. That mattered. She could have humiliated him right there in front of everybody. She could have unleashed every ounce of anger she had swallowed tonight. But standing in the cold rain beneath flashing lights, she realized something important. Carrying humiliation into somebody else's soul only multiplied it. So instead she simply said, then make sure she grows up seeing people clearly. Tyler's eyes lifted toward hers slowly. He nodded once. No defense. No excuses. Just understanding finally beginning to settle in. Sergeant Reeves spoke briefly with the gas station manager near the entrance before turning back toward Brooks again. The older officer's expression had hardened now in a way that told Naomi the night was far from over for him. But Naomi no longer cared about punishment or headlines or viral videos. She cared about getting home before Isaiah fell asleep waiting for her again. She reached for her car door, then paused briefly and looked toward Tyler one last time. Next time, she said quietly, see the person before the fear. Tyler lowered his head. Yes, ma'am. Naomi slid into the driver's seat and closed the door gently behind her, shutting out most of the rain and noise from the gas station at last. For a few seconds, she simply sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel while her breathing slowly steadied inside the quiet hum of the old Honda. Water dripped from the sleeves of her hoodie onto the floor mat below. Outside the windshield, the flashing patrol lights still reflected across the wet pavement in soft fading colors, but they no longer felt overwhelming. Just distant. Tired. Like the end of a storm finally moving away. Naomi looked toward the passenger seat where the paper bag from the hospital still rested untouched beside the folded crayon drawing from the little girl she had helped save earlier that night. The edges of the paper were damp now from the moisture in the car. She picked it up carefully and unfolded it beneath the weak glow of the dashboard lights. A crooked drawing of a nurse stood beneath a bright yellow sun with shaky handwriting across the top that read, "Thank you for saving me." Naomi stared at the words silently while emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Outside, Sergeant Reeves continued speaking with Officer Brooks near the patrol SUV. Brooks no longer looked in control of anything. His shoulders were tense, his head lowered slightly, while Reeves spoke in calm, measured sentences that Naomi could not hear through the rain-speckled glass. Tyler stood several feet away beside the cruiser, staring down at the pavement as if replaying the entire night inside his mind. Naomi did not hate him. That surprised her most. She was too exhausted for hate. What she felt instead was sadness that moments like this kept teaching the same lesson over and over to people who refused to learn until somebody suffered publicly first. Her phone screen suddenly lit up beside the gearshift. Isaiah calling again. Naomi answered immediately and put the phone on speaker. "Hey baby," she whispered softly. "Mom." His voice sounded thick with sleep. "Are you coming home now?" Naomi closed her eyes briefly and smiled for the first time all night. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am coming home." Isaiah yawned softly through the speaker. "Grandma said your coffee is probably cold now." Naomi let out a tired laugh under her breath. "Yeah, probably. Did something bad happen?" The question sat gently in the small space of the car. Naomi looked through the windshield one last time toward the officers standing beneath the rain and flashing lights. Then she looked back at the child's drawing resting in her lap. "Some people forgot how to see clearly tonight," she said softly. "But it is okay now." Isaiah was quiet for a moment before asking, "Did you still help people today?" Naomi felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." Another yawn crackled through the phone. "Okay. Drive safe, Mom. I love you." "Love you too." The line disconnected gently. Naomi rested her forehead against the steering wheel for one brief second while rain tapped softly against the roof above her. Then she started the engine. Warm air slowly drifted through the vents as the headlights reflected across the soaked highway stretching ahead into the dark Mississippi night. She pulled away from the gas station slowly, passing beneath the blinking security camera one final time. In her rearview mirror, the red and blue lights grew smaller and smaller until they finally disappeared completely. Far ahead on the horizon, morning had already begun creeping into the sky in thin, pale shades of blue.